All right, can you all see my screen? Yep.
Yes.
Awesome. Okay, well, I will begin then. Hi, my name is Cailey. Welcome and good morning, everyone. I'm going to begin my presentation with a few thank yous. So first to Ellen, then to Aaron Dioy, my mentor, Mitch Blessing, Kylie Van Note, the faculty members at MCAD, my 2022 cohort, and my support systems. Now let's jump in. Just like all of you, I wear plenty of hats, from designer to writer, maker, thinker, caretaker, teacher. Each of these roles influence the work that I create, from media and print materials to the words for the stories that I write, that go into the books that I make, and the records that I so delicately keep. To begin with an overview of my practice, it gets a little complicated, so we'll break it down together. My practice asks the viewer to think of behaviors as outcomes of past experiences, of your own and those held in place. I ask rather than give because I believe it matters what stories make stories. This thought process is adapted by author and thinker Donna Haraway, as quoted here from her novel, Staying with the Trouble. I engage with those who are willing to be an open viewer, whether or not they are within the walls of the institutions who stake claim to most of the art created today. An attempt at exploring this today is how I plan to allow those who are interested to engage further. You'll see QR codes throughout this presentation. If you're called to explore further in my work, I encourage you to do so using those tools as a way to allow open source style group learning. Think of behaviors as emerging from past experiences. Maybe it's the designer in me, but it seems to make the most sense if I think about it as though it's a physics equation. For every experience, you're left with an outcome. It is not absolute, it is not binary. It can be good, bad, or otherwise. But that outcome surfaces as an adapted behavior. The memories of experiences are critical to how our brains process them. It's not just memories of your own lived experiences, but also the experiences of the stories you've been told and the experiences of the land that you occupy. Place holds an extreme importance in the work that I produce today, and understanding its ability to have often invisible to humans say in our behaviors plays an important role in my practice. There are different kinds of learners, and I love that. So here's a visual representation to complement the previously written explanation. I'm a designer who spends most of my time, like the cat on the left, frantically creating for the consumer. Simultaneously, I'm the cat on the right, clumsily making, growing in the art of craft through bookmaking, printing, and narrative storytelling explorations. In my practice, this is how I organize my thoughts, themes, ideas, and sources of information. Most of my ideas are straight products of the construction of these maps, both physical and using digital tools such as the example you're seeing. It makes sense how graphic design holds real estate in my practice. It's the fertilizer that feeds the seed of my creativity. However, it's only a recent discovery of mine to identify the ways that graphic design is simply a tool rather than a medium. Its fixation in capitalism is draining, but required to survive in this economy. This drain has led me to authors and designers such as Jarrett Fuller and Aggie Tompkins as sources of inspiration and fuel to continue as part of a community. I'll direct your attention to the first split in my practice, me and design. Let's follow that little green string of me. I am a culmination of experiences. Through storytelling, specifically artist bookmaking, I found my outlet for caretaking of records, memories, and experiences of my past and the past of others like me. Care exists in every aspect of bookmaking, from the planning of spreads and the intentions to the crafting of each page. Here lies the critical distinction between production book, think graphic design in a sense, and an artist book. And within the difference, oftentimes, care in the craft is the differentiator. To simply put, in my practice, care matters. Now, to give those little visual representations a home, this is where they live in my practice. And because I simply can't get enough, here are a few more to complete the visual scene. Themes in my work are staggered and overlaid. Memories, behaviors, narrative, documentation, caretaking, and interconnectedness. Each of these words you've probably already heard me say at least once, but I'd like to elaborate on a few. I began my research in memory with Israeli professor and philosopher Avishai Margalit, The Ethics of Memory. Based on his definitions, memories can be episodic, think events and dated objects, multifarious, this is an abstract kind of memory, meaning the meanings of words and multiplication tables, and somatic, which means you're remembering an emotion towards something, someone, or an event. I use this thinking when trying to deduct the memories to explore in my works. Behaviors I reflect on are centrally based on my location and the people within it. An interview that was conducted in 2009 in Traverse County, my hometown's county, where the following quote was said by 64-year-old resident Evie Rinke. People around here are independent, but not because they want to be, but because they've had to be. This result of behavior due to experience is a prime example of the types of behavioral outcomes my work engages with. Bookmaking is narrative. It is caretaking. It is an exploration of the interconnected nature of art, design, craft, narrative, and experience. I'd like to share a few of my work's visual influences, the first being well-known designer, author, and thinker Bruno Monrey. His work, the Libro Eligibile NY1, published in 1949, is an artist book, but it's different because it communicates with no words. The ability to capture an audience without a written narrative. This work was done, one of a series by Bruno, and one I reflect back on frequently when trying to consider how I want to explore narrative non-traditionally. The second designer artist is far more contemporary, which reflects in his work all too well. Jarrett Fuller, a contemporary designer, teacher, and design writer, works in an array of mediums. He believes designers should be constant readers, which has heavily influenced my own reading intake. As many of my cohorts could support, I always seem to have a weird source up my sleeve for everything. Just like creating this presentation with open source and group learning in mind, I bring this influence further than just his visual, particularly beautiful typography influence on me, but rather his way of approaching graphic design as a tool. Through bookmaking, I am seeing the unseen. I am noticing and engaging with. I am bringing my technical skills of graphic design into a form of caretaking in the way only the human hand can do, thinking with care. I'd like to move into showing you two select pieces I've created with the intentions of having them serve as influences to my thesis work in the coming spring. This piece, titled Silence, is a flag book I created based on the singular memory of an instance of family violence. It was not created to heal, but rather exposed light on a not commonly talked about story held by so many. It illustrates through broken narrative, mimicking the way I recall the particularly lived experience. My mother was trained as an English teacher, and it reflects itself very strongly in my work at times. In this piece, I intentionally broke that given mold in my mind in instances, writing in both past and present tense. This communicates the way that I also recall the experience. I wrote the narrative in a linear way, breaking it into 3 columns, spanning 45 pages on printed craft accordion. As a contrast, I wrote a more abstract, collective, memory-based narrative in my next project titled A Collection of Place. I work with memories associated with site-specific place and object communication through the images on each page. From front to back, this book can be read from either direction, demanding the reader to be an independent participant in the reading experience. The narrative flows, breaking at corners of images, creating multi-meanings per sentence. Images were selected based on memories associated with them, first capturing the scene and then writing the narrative, identifying the you as the place itself. This process is documented in the turning of the zine from front to back, from page flip to once unfolded and orchestrated singular image. My practice's journey has not come to an end. My exploration on how design acts as a tool in the interconnected ways of being in a continuous transformative state. I'll leave you with a parting poem that has influenced my work more than I could ever explain. It's called You Learn by George Louis Borges. And I'm just going to read the last paragraph. Instead of waiting for someone to bring you flowers, you learn that you really can endure and you really are strong and you really have worth, and you learn, and with every goodbye you learn. Design can and does live in the same world as art, as it is equally as important to understanding the human condition. The unique ways each person, knowingly and otherwise, engages with design brings to the world beautiful acts of creation. Thank you for your attention during my presentation. If anyone is interested in getting a copy of this presentation to find further access to the references, quotes, or anything else, please feel free to scan the following QR code on the bottom right. I'll open the Zoom for questions.
Thank you so much, Cailey. That was wonderful. And while we wait to see a couple questions in the chat, I wonder if you could copy and paste your URL into the chat for people who are interested.
Yeah.
Awesome. That will help people take a moment and reflect. We've got 5 minutes for Q&A, so I hope people have some thoughts, some questions for Cailey.
Maybe I was just that thorough.
Oh, it was very thorough. It was very excellent. Anyone? Well, I have a question for you. What do you think, as you go forward, it will be the main thrust of your thesis work?
I would have to say it's going to be narrative.
Okay.
And memory, but how memory engages with the narrative in all of its different ways, that will be probably the driving factor.
Nice.
In what you'll see coming in the spring.
Fantastic. I'm so excited. I can't wait. Oh, here's a question. Kate asks, I would love to know how you consider scale in your work, as well as how an audience engages with your book work.
Great question, Kate. Kate has had the opportunity to physically engage with my work, and that is how I consider scale. When the books are held in your hand, I delicately think of what is that holding experience going to be like? What size is it going to be in your hands as you open it? And I want that to be an intimate experience. So they're all like, they all fit in your hand, which is the thinking behind how I want them to engage with it is an intimate, personal experience.
Excellent. Oh, here's a question from Kay. Where do you typically begin in your bookmaking practice? Examples, thumbnails, sketches, and such.
I start with those maps and word maps. So a lot of creatives, you would think that as a creative myself, I would start with sketching and drawing, but that's not always usually the case for me. I'm more of a word-driven person. So I start with all of word associations that I can connect with that project. And then as I connect them at those connections, I can usually think of a visual. And that actually, the second one, I have like the thumbnails and like, so I do thumbnail too, but I start with words usually.
Wonderful. And here's one more question. This is from Shoshana. How do you approach materials? How do you choose them?
Color is something I've struggled with in my practice from day one, and it feels a lot. Well, color drives my material selection more than it drives my graphic design digital work. And when I'm choosing materials, I think about the color of them, where they were sourced, and how they feel in the hand. So that's how I approach them. That's how I choose them, kind of like on a ranked scale.
Wonderful. And I think we have maybe time for one more. If anybody else has a question for Cailey. And if not, that's okay. Oh, here we go, Anda. You talked about the process of deciding what idea or story to tell. Do you ever come upon a story or idea during the process of making?
I do. That was a great question. So that happens a lot. And it's almost as though you're digging for a certain outcome. Like there's an outcome at the bottom of a bucket that you're digging in, but you get all these other little discoveries as you go. And it's a personal choice to stay on task. I almost have to like put the blinders on, but I do record ideas that come out of it by word mapping off of any idea. Usually I catch most of them in that exploration process, but sometimes I don't. And the ones that I don't usually turn into the next project. Thank you, Anda. That was a good one.
That's a really good question. I think that's a good one to end on.